So today we get a closer look at the spider himself then. Let's take a look at the previewed new rules for the menacing Fabius Bile. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So it looks like it's going to be War of the Spider this weekend then, with this very nice new model of Fabius Bile coming out alongside it. In today's Warhammer community video, we've got a few new pictures of Fabius Bile up close, just to be able to see a bit more of the detail, his stat line and weapons, and his ability to enhance some Heretic Astartes units. I believe that they did say in other previews that we're going to be seeing the followers of Fabius Bile represented in their own mini section in this book, which is one of the areas that I'm most intrigued in finding out more about. There's nothing about them today, so let's take a look at Mr. Spider himself. So as we know, Fabius Bile was an apothecary in the Emperor's Children Legion before it fell to chaos, and has since then been a valuable resource for the Heretic Astartes, being able to provide them with new recruits, and always attempting to improve on the Emperor's creations by augmenting Space Marines. War of the Spider is going to be set in the ruins of the Cadian system, with both the Death Guard and the Adeptus Custodes pursuing him and his band of renegades. I think they've done a really good job with this sinister new model. The detail's just quite a lot more crisp, and I think that makes quite a big deal when you're trying to render some sharp and spidery limbs that carry his various surgical equipment. I really like the way he's found himself his own little Igor follower figure, who seems to be in the process of harvesting some fallen ultramarine genetic material, no doubt to be put to good use regrowing new Space Marines. Looks like he's getting his hands on some Primaris genetic material there. All very nice, and I'm sure he's going to be quite a popular one for people to pick up for Chaos armies. If we move on to look at his previewed rules then, first of all we have his stat line, though we haven't seen the one for his servant Acolyte, though I'm sure he'll have a relatively meagre profile. In terms of Fabius himself, it's interesting that his stat line is actually worse than the stat line that he previously had. It's pretty much the same as the previous one, except instead of 6 attacks he now has 4, and instead of strength 5 he now has 4 as well. So at first look it would seem to be a bit of a downgrade, but the shortfall is very made up for with his gear. Firstly, that +1 strength that made him strength 5 before has now gone on to the Rod of Torment, so he still will be strength 5 in close combat, and in melee he'll be AP -1 and damage D3 unless he's targeting vehicles when it's only damage 1. I think he is really meant to be more of a buffing character than a melee one, although if he has a similar points cost to his 80 points that he had in his previous incarnation, then it's really not too bad for a fairly cheap character. Interestingly though, they've also separated out the attacks for his backpack, which I believe is called a Chirurgeon, although when I googled it, it did have multiple different pronunciations. It is a real word though, it's basically an archaic word for a surgeon. Basically whenever Fabius Bile fights, he can make 3 additional attacks with this weapon, and these will be at strength 4, AP -2, damage 1, so it means that in combination with a Hateful Assault, he's typically going to be making 8 attacks per turn. It's also quite nice that they separated out this profile, because it gives you the option to either use this or his Rod of Torment for the rest of his attacks. Against some targets such as toughness 7 vehicles or toughness 3 guardsmen, it's actually going to make more sense to use his Chirurgeon to make those attacks rather than the Rod of Torment. I'm presuming that Zyklos Needler pistol that he hasn't received any new changes if they're not mentioning anything. It's basically an 18-inch pistol weapon with 1 damage and no AP, but it wounds on 2s against anything that isn't a vehicle. In terms of his stat line though, the biggest buff that Fabius has received is that now this Chirurgeon also gives him a 5+ feel no pain type save, as well as regenerating him D3 lost wounds per turn. Basically Fabius is now just going to be very hard to put down. This equates to a 50% durability increase, plus those regenerating wounds. If he remains at the same points cost, or something close to it, then it means he's just a lot tougher for the points. Prior to this, he did have the wound regeneration, but didn't have the feel no pain. So overall, it looks like he's a decent amount tougher, a little bit more fighty, and now looking very swanky indeed in his nice coat of skin. But let's take a look at his buffing abilities. Basically, as the rules stand at the moment, Fabius can use his Enhanced Warrior special rule at the end of the movement phase, on any unit of Heretic Astartes infantry, but not characters, when they're within 1 inch of him. You roll 1 dice per model in the unit, and the unit suffers a mortal wound for every roll of a 6. So on big units you might suffer a casualty or 2, but from there you roll a d3, and you get one of the 3 bonuses seen on this chart. The unit either receives +1 strength, +1 toughness, or +1 to their number of attacks. Basically Fabius is going to have synergy with a big unit of Chaos Marines, likely a melee unit, seeing as 2 of the 3 bonuses are melee buffs. So things like large units of Possessed are excellent for this. Now that creepy little Surgeon Acolyte though is actually going to be a massive boon to this role. This rule, another pair of hands, means that if he's accompanied by a Surgeon Acolyte, after rolling a d3 for the Enhanced Warrior's ability, you can add or subtract 1 from the roll result. So for example, if you roll a 3 for extra attacks, then you can also turn it into a 2 for +1 toughness. Now this is absolutely excellent for getting some reliability out of the roll. Basically prior to this you'd only really ever want to target melee units with this, as you're going to kill some of them, as you want the buff to be worth it one way or the other. The toughness buff I would argue is the strongest out of the three of these, as it's not just a damage output buff, but it's actually going to boost their defense both to enemy shooting and to enemy close combat. And now you have the Chirurgeon Acolyte, you can guarantee that any roll could be a 2 and get the toughness if you want it. This really does make Fabius Bile pretty much universally useful, and you're very likely to be saving more Heretic Astartes lives than you're killing by using the buff. I can very much see him being used as a possessed bomb toughness boost, as having a huge amount of 2 wound infantry that can have very decent invul saves with psychic powers and things, go from a toughness 4 to a toughness 5, it's just going to mean that small armors fire is going to patter off them rather than kill the unit a bit more easily. You can of course stack that with all sorts of other defensive buffs, and also if you manage to get them a feel no pain type save from any source that's available to us, then you might even have a chance of resisting the mortal wounds that Fabius himself causes on the unit, which would make it even more viable. I think that this buff is generally going to be more worth it on 2 wound models such as Terminators or Possessed, just because the mortal wounds are going to kill fewer models due to them having more wounds. I'd much rather sacrifice an average of 1.5 Possessed from a big unit of Possessed, compared with 3 Space Marines that you might get from a 20-man Space Marine unit. I'm not saying that the attacks and strength couldn't be particularly worth it on certain units, but some of them might not be worth it depending on the unit that you're buffing. Say if you're either trying to buff a ranged unit, or you already have a meaningfully high number of strength that's not really going to care too much if it goes to 1 extra. Say if you're using power axes or something and all of your unit is strength 5, then going to strength 6 really isn't that big of a buff. I wouldn't want to kill a certain proportion of the unit to get that. I genuinely think that Fabius Bile is going to be a really interesting buffing character going forwards. There's just a lot of potential for various different units acquiring better toughness and making them a lot nastier. You could have toughness 5 units of 20 Chaos Marines, toughness 5 Khorne Berserkers, toughness 5 Mutilators. Basically just going from toughness 4 to toughness 5 is quite a big durability increase against lots of weapons, particularly the ubiquitous bolt gun, and things that are strength 5 like heavy bolters or pulse rifles for example. So let me know what you think of the rules down in the comments below. I'll most certainly be covering the War of the Spider news as it comes out, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more. If you've been enjoying the videos and would like to help support the channel, then I'd just like to mention the Patreon page I have, which is down in the description below. As well as helping keep all of these videos coming, channel patrons also get a bunch of other bonuses, such as being able to see early videos each week, voting on what sort of videos come next for the channel, and regular prize draws where I post out some miniatures to lucky winners. If any of that sounds good to you, or just like to help keep these videos coming, then the link is down in the description below. A big thank you to my current patrons for allowing this channel to be possible. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.